Hello, everybody. I have the dubious privilege of trying to follow my colleagues in Denmark and Germany, world leaders in renewable and community energy. And as Paul has outlined, Ireland just isn't at the races in terms of community energy to date. And I suppose that's the starting point for where we are at. I suppose any good therapist will tell you you need to start dealing with the problem by recognising it, and that is the problem. I mean, essentially, we have one community energy project in Ireland today, Temple-Derry. I see John Fogarty is in the audience. John and his comrades have done amazing work to get that project off the ground, given the challenges that exist for community energy in Ireland to date. And I suppose, you know, for me as an ordinary Irish citizen first and foremost, but particularly with my energy official hat on, I genuinely find that that's an affront to me that we only have one community energy project in Ireland. So essentially what we're about today and the process that we're going through right now is to deliver a flourishing community energy sector, starting in the next few years, but I suppose realistically it's going to kick off slowly. It's going to take a couple of projects to get going before we can genuinely build. And what we're trying to do essentially at the moment in terms of policy is to put in place the structures and the supports to deliver. So it might be just useful to take a step back initially and ask ourselves why? Why do we care about community energy? And essentially, I think there's a lot of very good reasons. I think the critical one really is the one in the middle there, guaranteed revenue streams. Essentially, through the government scheme that we're promoting today, community projects can have access to a guaranteed revenue stream if they get a contract through that scheme. Essentially around 15 years lifespan, and that guaranteed revenue stream coming into citizens and communities around the country can make a huge contribution to the regeneration of particularly rural Ireland, obviously. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits. They've all been explored extremely well in research that's out there. I see Claire Watson in the audience has done great research in this area, and others. So there's a lot of genuinely important social reasons for trying to kick off a community generation sector. So getting back to the simple goal that we have, getting to 2025 with community projects in existence. What do we need to do to deliver on that? Well, we have to apply policy and we have to provide supports. I'm just in general terms, I at sort of conferences I've spoken at before, I would take considerable time talking about the policy. Today we need to get into the details. So in one slide I'll sum it up. And essentially, I think my main message on this would be, and I think Paul alluded to it earlier, there's a huge groundswell of support at almost every level of society now for community energy. On the left-hand side there, I've just outlined a few of the key official policy statements, all of which are calling for the delivery of community energy and getting communities and citizens involved in what we call the energy transition, the move to decarbonise our economy. And then on the right-hand side, we have what I would call citizen and public policy calls. So these are things like the Citizens' Assembly, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate Action, and I could even add yourselves into that category there. Paul mentioned the word campaigners earlier. People like yourselves and NGOs who have actually been approaching government, approaching officials saying we need to get this thing started and so on. So at the moment there's a brilliant policy, there's an alignment of all of that. So that is helpful to us in terms of getting this thing done, but it's still complex. So what is it? I suppose we're trying to bring policy and supports together to deliver this, and essentially this is the vehicle for delivering this is the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. That's the main delivery vehicle. There are other ones, there's other good stuff going on in terms of community energy. that I won't have time to talk about today, but the main one we're focusing on is the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. We've heard some commentary, particularly from Craig already, about what schemes nowadays have to develop through an auction format. But I think, and that isn't ideal for communities, let's be clear about that. But what we're trying to do is ensure that communities have their own separate category within these auctions, so that at least you've got a fair chance of competing and winning in the auction rather than going up against the big professional developers. And in the framing of this scheme that was signed off by government in July of last year, we essentially wrote communities into that high-level design front and centre, essentially. So now it's about delivering on that. Just very quickly, I suppose, as Paul mentioned, communities is one important component of the scheme, but in reality, we need a huge amount of renewable energy to come through the system in the coming decades, and the scheme is to deliver on all of that. Okay, so there are essentially 4 community pillars within the context of the scheme, and Paul mentioned public consultation. We're going out to public consultation tomorrow or Friday on the approach to the overall scheme, and within that there's obviously going to be sections on the community proposals that we have. Here today you're getting a preview of those, and I think it's only appropriate. You actually for once are special in this. You're getting this ahead of the formal launch, and I got approvals from the highest levels in my department to be able to speak to you on these. There are 4 pillars. 2 of them relate to community projects. So we want to get communities generating their own electricity, running their own projects and so on. And in order to do that, then we need to put in place what we're calling an enabling framework, essentially that supports to deliver and to handhold communities through what is a very complex process. I mean, electricity generation is not simple. But at the same time, communities throughout Ireland have a proud record of delivering on all sorts of things, everything from, the GAA, tidy towns, and maybe more importantly in this context, group water schemes. We've got the guts of 5,000 group water schemes in existence from over the decades. So I believe communities can deliver their own projects, but it still isn't simple, and we do need to handhold them through the process. The second set of 2 pillars are in relation to developer-led projects. So fine, the focus today is primarily on the community-led, but a large proportion, obviously, of the projects in this scheme are going to be run by professional developers. They will be big projects, massive capital investment. So we want to ensure that communities and citizens have a part of those as well. And there are 2 pillars that we are presenting in relation to that. One is there's a mandatory community benefit fund, and then secondly, there's a mandatory investment offering. So a big developer has to give an ownership or an investment offering to local communities. Okay, so the main challenges, and I'll go through most of these one by one in one slide, one topic. So state aid requirements, the definition, every single meeting that I've had in the last year and a quarter that I've been working on this, one of the topics that has arisen is the definition. Then we have to look at all of the other things that I've mentioned and how we can build a proper system of support and so on, and make sure that it's tight. We've heard about the possibility of developers gaming the system and so on. So we're looking at all of this in terms of challenges. And then 2 at the bottom that I've raised, these to date have been the critical challenges for communities to deliver community projects in Ireland. Grid connection and financing. So state aid is essentially a big challenge for us in terms of competition. So it's EU competition law. In fairness, it's there for a good reason. It's trying to protect consumer interests. It's trying to ensure that public money offered to sectors isn't badly spent, and more importantly, doesn't distort competition. So it means that when a government like ourselves now is bringing a scheme to Europe for approval, we have to ensure that it ties in and lines up with existing state aid legislation. There is a really strong challenge in this for us because it's a serious process, and they have challenged all 4 of those pillars that I've mentioned. In particular, they don't like the idea of communities having a separate category in the auction. So it is critical that we deliver that. If we don't, we are considering plans B, C, D and whatever, but not going to talk about them today. I'm still taking the view that we will get this through, but we can't be sure. So essentially, we've made a very strong business case, looking at this from a holistic perspective, saying that it's not just about financials, it's about all these other benefits to rural communities and so on. And that process is ongoing. We were out there most recently, just a fortnight ago. We're out there again next Wednesday and so on. So hopefully we can get that concluded by February of 2020, February next year. In terms of the public consultation, this is the first thing to really throw out at you. We are proposing a definition that includes those characteristics for communities. So essential, and we want feedback on this, and when I say feedback, I mean it might be just a paragraph in an email that you send to us to either support or improve these characteristics as we see them. We're trying to keep the projects small because we believe most community projects in reality are small. So 5 megawatts. We want open access for citizens to join this project wherever that project is, and we want participation to be open to locals first, but then extended nationwide if necessary to ensure that we get community projects off the ground. We're suggesting a minimum of 150 participants will need to sign up to these projects, and that is essentially to try and maintain cooperative principles. You either have to set up a co-op or a PLC or something else that I haven't heard of. And essentially the co-op principle there, 1 person, 1 vote. We also want to embed the sustainable energy communities in this process. Many of you out there are already members of those. We want SECs to be at the heart of any community project going forward, and if there isn't one in existence in your area and you think you have a project, you need to set one up. Other entities will be allowed to join in as well, as SMEs and local authorities, because they're useful in terms of funding and so on, and expertise. And we're also proposing that after the return on investments offered to investors, which are normal and appropriate rates of return, after those, then the primary purpose of 51% of the profit thereafter is to go into community initiatives. Okay, so we'll be happy to talk about that in the Q&A maybe, and also to take your feedback. Actually, I'll jump forward to here. I've mentioned the auction category. So the definition is critical for deciding what projects go into the community category in the auction. Okay, so obviously only those that comply go in there. And then we've already committed in government to this range of supports to be put in place. Trusted intermediaries who are essentially mentors, trusted advisors who give specialist expertise to communities. Financial supports will include feasibility grants, 25 or 30 grand, and what we're calling soft development loans up to around 150, 175,000. So these are real meaningful supports that will deliver this sector, assuming you come on board and work with us and the agents we put in place to deliver this. And also there's obviously going to be an information warehouse, and there's going to be an implementing authority. I'll come to that later. I am rushing because there's a lot in this, so apologies. I just want to, sorry, I just skipped forward. How do I go back here? Any idea how I go back, Paul? Page up. Where is page up? Oh yeah, there it is. So then now we're into the realm of the developer-led projects, okay? And this is where we're talking about communities benefiting from those as well. So we're mandating a community benefit fund, which will deliver based on our planned capacities in this first auction. Will deliver up to 6 million a year into communities within the vicinity of projects. It's a huge amount of money to be coming into communities, and we do need to put in some sort of apparatus around ensuring that that spend is done properly. So we propose the following characteristics. We will set up a benefits register to make sure this is properly reported, and we will publish a good principles sort of guidebook around how these funds should be administered and so on. We expect the developers to set the funds up, and we expect we will mandate certain promotional requirements so that citizens and communities know that these funds are available to them. We have looked at a variety of models of potential administration of the funds, and we're going to allow a certain amount of opportunity there for different types of models to apply. So for instance, it could be that the developer will run the fund themselves. It could be that they will procure some third party to run it for them. Or it could be that, for instance, the public participation networks might have a role in this, and I've talked to the Department of Community Affairs in that regard. There's all kinds of models, and we want to leave it open, but the critical thing is that all of them will have to include local input. So there'll have to be sort of committees set up that include local representatives and so on. We're going to mandate 2 additional things. In this, we're going to mandate that near neighbours will receive benefit payments for reason of where they're living and effectively could be discommoded by these developments. The proposal at the moment is €1,000 annual payment to those who live within 1 kilometre of the facility of the project, and for those who live between 1 and 2 kilometres, €500 per year. That will come out of the fund first, and then after that we will mandate that at least 50% of the remainder will be spent in the community on climate action, energy efficiency, sustainable energy measures. So the idea here is that we try and really tackle climate action down on the ground by the appropriate use of these funds. And obviously we will have monitoring and compliance built in. Now, investment opportunities for citizens and communities in big developer-led projects. This is incredibly tricky, and we've heard already some commentary from previous speakers about, the difficulties of sort of lining this up and making sure that it works and so on. So I suppose we did a lot of research around what might work in Ireland and so on. One of the key issues, in fairness, for developers, I think developers are genuinely committed to communities being part of their projects and the benefit fund and so on. We've had no kickback from developers on those proposals at all, like as in the overall proposal. These are specific, but the overall proposal when we announced them last year. Here it's tricky because I suppose from a developer's perspective, if I do a good job on getting 10% or whatever of my company offered out to citizens, it's going to cost me in administration and just complexity around dealing with banks and so on. They're not just dealing with me anymore, they're dealing with citizens or communities. And if another developer down the road doesn't do a good job like that, potentially that developer is able to bid into the auction at a cheaper price and win in the auction. So there's a real issue around leveling the playing pitch for all developers in this. And in the end, what we're proposing is a centralised citizen investment scheme in clean green energy, to be called, the working title is the Renewable Electricity Participation Scheme. It means that all projects will subscribe to this scheme, or else they will demonstrate to us that they can do better. They can make a better offer to communities, or at least match it. And essentially the way this will work is that we're mandating that 5% of the capital value of every project must be lined up through this scheme for citizens to invest in. Now 5% sounds like a small amount of money. It isn't. Based on our projections for the first auction, that figure is going to be somewhere between 40 and 75 million euro. So essentially that amount of money or investment opportunity is going to be made available to ordinary Irish people. There are a bunch of citizen protections built into the draft proposal as we stand. The main one being we propose to guarantee the capital of the scheme, and that will be done through an indemnity fund that all developers will have to fund, so that if there are project failures, that the indemnity fund will ensure that people who invested in those projects will get their capital back from that fund. We have proposed very attractive rates of return that start from 7% and go significantly higher. And the variables that affect how high they go are things like how close you live to the project and how long you're prepared to leave your investment in there. So on 5, 10 and 15 year periods, the rates go higher. The priority access to this scheme is for those in the first instance who live closest, so up to 10 kilometres. Then if that isn't fully subscribed, and realistically it won't be, considering the money I've just mentioned, it'll be opened up to county residents, or 2 counties if the wind farm is close to 2, and so on, and eventually nationwide. It does mean that citizens local to these projects will have the first refusal. If they don't want to invest or can't, that's fine, but they'll have the first refusal. And it does also guarantee that urban dwellers will have an opportunity to invest also when it goes to a nationwide offering, because everybody should have an opportunity to invest in clean green energy, and we believe that this is a genuine vehicle for real climate action by ordinary Irish citizens. How am I on time, Paul? 5 minutes. Okay. Talked about that. Actually fine on time then. 2 challenges that I mentioned somewhere earlier on. Grid connection, so a real issue for communities to date. And we've done a lot of work in this area, because if we don't fix this, then there are no community projects, frankly. So we basically started addressing it in a little line of text that we put into the Energy Act of 2016, which effectively directs the energy regulator, who has control of grid connection policy. We directed them in that legislation to take account of government policy on community energy. And the government policy has then followed and flowed in things like the Energy White Paper, the Climate Action Plan, and now this. We set up a national working group made up of the state bodies, so ourselves, the SEAI, EirGrid, the 2 and ESB networks. Like, we realise this is a problem the state has to fix. So we brought those groups together, and essentially CRU, the regulator, have now gone out to public consultation on a proposed approach to community energy. And that is essentially proposing that there will be allocated grid connections for 15 community projects year on year, and building as necessary. The application can be made to the grid operators without planning permission, therefore we reduce the amount of money that has to be invested by communities. There is a commitment to the expedient processing of the application, and also there's a commitment to direct the system operators, so ESB networks, to really work with the communities to make it simple and to clearly outline what the investment requirements will be, and so on and so forth. And in that regard, ESB networks, when they're sitting at that national working group, have committed to putting in place community representatives. to deal with community queries on grid. Financing of the scheme, like I suppose financing of community projects, I've mentioned already things like the feasibility grants and development loans and so on, but obviously there's also an issue trying to get the equity that you need at the outset of projects. We're hoping that the definition, given how broad it is and the need for more than 150 people and so on, we're hoping that will accommodate the financing of these projects to some extent. But also we have had a range of talks with a range of different potential partners with a view to setting up some sort of a fund that can be accessed by communities at the outset for equity finance. And that probably would operate on some sort of a very low rate of return interest payments. I can't announce anything on it in detail yet, but we're certainly working on that in a very meaningful way. How does all of this work? What's the structure that's going to underpin this? We're going to be bringing a proposal to the Minister in the coming weeks to appoint the SEAI as the implementation body for the scheme. They already have huge experience in the Better Energy Community Scheme and the SECs that we've mentioned earlier. And they already have a lot of the supports in place for the SEC network that we're going to need here, like the mentors and so on. But I think in recognition of just how complex this area is, we're also proposing that above SEAI in the mix will be a steering group that will be chaired by ourselves in the department and will include community representatives and trusted intermediary representatives. So with, the plan is that literally this group will have a lot of teeth to actually identify issues that may be emerging as we kick this thing along, and they'll actually be able to help direct SEAI to continually improve the offering to communities. In terms of the community journey, what we're recommending is that, so how do you get a project into this scheme and how do you get your money, a 15-year contract? So set up a sustainable energy community, and within that context or framework you'll have an energy master plan, and you'll hopefully kick off some energy efficiency project to cut your teeth, as it were, because electricity generation is a little bit more complex. So essentially get an energy efficiency project done, and then you can move into generation. And then when you start getting involved in electricity generation, we have trusted intermediaries in place to handhold. We have trusted advisors, these are going to be in place in the coming year so that they're ready. Trusted advisors to give specialist information and guidance. And then we've talked about grid, we've talked about finance. We can do nothing on planning, I'm sorry, but essentially once you put all those together, then you have your loads of community energy projects. Thank you for your time. Apologies for being so brief.